part of our remit at CebAI is to build knowledge exchange activities, and that is the process of getting ideas out of the academic world and into the commercial environment, turning them into sustainable commercial entities. And I've got 3 really great guests joining me this afternoon, and each one of them has really quite different experience of moving knowledge out of the academic realm and making an impact in the commercial sector. And that's what I want to discuss this afternoon, what we should be doing more of to build knowledge exchange activities in the UK. Because if we can get these ideas out of our universities, we can support the economy and innovate our commercial sectors more effectively. And there is a gap at the moment in the UK. We could do better at this sort of stuff. And that's what we're going to discuss. So with me, I have Hao Zheng. Is that how I pronounce it? Hao? She's the co-founder and CEO of a company called RoboK, and it's a company that uses AI computer vision for large-scale transport and logistics infrastructure, and I'm going to leave Hao to explain more about that. But Hao founded RoboK while she was still at Cambridge University, and that was 2 years ago. She now employs 14 people. They're gearing up for Series A funding, and she's first-hand experience of getting a startup running from an idea at master's level in university into making quite an impressive impact in the commercial world. So hello to Hao.
Hello.
And welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Chris Payne is an investor at Oxford Capital, and he specialises in setting up deals and finding new investments. So Chris is a money man. Oxford Capital has been an early stage investor in technology companies for more than 20 years. And they actively look, it says on their website, for tech-driven companies with strong entrepreneur founders. So Chris will be able to tell us what investors are really looking for in startup companies. Thank you very much for joining us, Chris.
Thank you for having me.
And last, but no means least, we have Hamish McAlpine. Hamish is a principal consultant, I think that means really important, at Oxentia, where he works on strategy development and training in knowledge exchange and innovation management. So before joining Oxentia, Hamish was head of data and evidence at Research England, where he was responsible for creating England's first knowledge exchange framework, the KEF. He helped shape government policy related to knowledge exchange and commercialisation. And so Hamish here has deep experience of analysing the knowledge exchange landscape. And so he's going to be able to give us some insights into how we might be more effective. So welcome to all 3 guests. Thank you very much for joining us. So I thought the first question was for Hamish, really. What is the actual definition of knowledge exchange? What do we mean when we say that, Hamish?
So it's actually remarkably simple. It's one of the few things that's defined in law in the Higher Education and Research Act in 2017, which is really helpfully explains it as the exchange of knowledge. But it does elaborate on that slightly. So it's the exchange of knowledge for economic or societal benefit and from any disciplines. And in that context, it's the exchange of knowledge between an academic partner and someone who is not another academic. So it's some knowledge-based interaction between a university and the wider world. Traditionally, that was what was called technology transfer or knowledge transfer. Knowledge exchange is a kind of a newer term which reflects a kind of often very two-way interaction between the university partner and the economic or civil partner. And it encompasses everything now. So commercialization is a super important part of knowledge exchange, but universities also exchange knowledge through consultancy, through contract research, through their engagement with public and community groups. So it's really a kind of all-encompassing term for those knowledge-based interactions, including commercialization.
Brilliant, thank you, Hamish. So knowledge exchange, it's a two-way flow of people and ideas between the research environment and the wider economy. And the idea is that it contributes to national prosperity, the quality of life of our citizens, and the cultural enrichment of our society. Is that about right?
It sounds fair.
Great. It doesn't seem like rocket science, really, does it? It's just exchanging ideas. So as the architect of this knowledge exchange framework, can you explain briefly what that is and why it was necessary to create it? Why do we have to codify what we're doing? Why can't we just get on with doing it?
So it had, the KEF was initiated by many universities ministers ago, Joe Johnson, and it had a kind of dual purpose. The first was to give universities information in terms of their performance relative to other institutions, so they could understand and hopefully improve their own performance in this space. And the second was potentially to give external partners or potential external partners a view of what universities were doing and where their strengths really lay. And I guess underpinning both of those was an idea around increasing public accountability and visibility for universities as the funding increased. So in England, there's what was called the Higher Education Innovation Fund, which supports knowledge exchange in English universities, and that increased to £250 million a year. So yeah, mainly about universities' visibility and improving performance, but also that kind of underpinning accountability piece.
But is there a worry that measuring these metrics may distort the behaviour then of universities? I've read something recently called Goodhart's Law, which is that when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure, because people just aim for the measure as a target, don't they?
Yeah, it's certainly a risk. So the KEF is based on a number of metrics, and in that wide kind of knowledge exchange space, including commercialisation. And I agree, if you choose the wrong metrics, particularly in commercialisation, there's a real danger it will drive the wrong behaviours. But the KEF deliberately doesn't count things like company formation or the number of patents a university might file, because it's very easy to incorporate a company. It doesn't mean that company is any good. It doesn't mean it's investable. So we were trying to develop measures of performance, like the amount of investment a company receives, or its turnover, or its rate of growth, or how long it survives for, whether it's acquired, whether it can scale or not. And I think they're much more effective measures. It's really very hard, I'm sure you'd agree, to fool a VC into investing in you if it's not an investable company. So I think choosing the right measures is the important thing.
And what have we learned from the KEF in the couple of years that it's been in operation then? I mean, what do we know about our university knowledge exchange landscape?
So the data that underpins the KEF has allowed us to do some international comparisons. And in my view, we look broadly similar to the US in terms of what we can measure about our spin-outs. So the amount of research income that universities use to generate spin-outs is between 40 and 50 million pounds of research income in for every spin-out out, looking at a sector level. That's roughly the same as in the US. But I think the other main thing that knowledge exchange frameworks taught us is everything we don't know about the metrics. And I think it's one thing it really did do, the data that underpinned it had been around a long time. It just never been used and exposed in this way. And I think one of the things it did kind of shine a light on is what we don't know and what measures we can't really easily compare with the US, which is a really, really interesting kind of vein of development. So, my view is I think the KEF is really interesting for universities, but it'll only really live up to its promise of providing really interesting, accurate, comparable information when we develop the metrics a bit further, which I know UKRI are working on now. So.
Okay, that's interesting. The president of Universities UK, a guy called Professor Steve West, said in a recent speech that universities should be put at the heart of economic and social recovery in the UK. And he mentioned some quite interesting stats, that universities over the next 5 years will provide £11.6 billion worth of support and services to small enterprises, businesses and not-for-profits. That universities in the UK generate almost 22,000 new companies and charities over the next 5 years, and they will undertake around £22 billion worth of research collaborations with the commercial sector. So it does seem like there's gold in the higher education sector hills. We just have to learn how to extract it more effectively, I think. And so Chris, I was going to ask you, the government's stated ambition, and it may well have changed because they're a bit changeable at the moment, is to position the UK as a global research superpower and leverage that positioning with private investment. So what is it that private investment will be looking for to invest?
So I think before answering the question directly, I want to share another stat that I've learned recently, which is for 2021, somewhere between 60 and 75% of the tech investment in the UK was capital that came from overseas sources. So it's great that we are investing in technology companies in this country, but we're not in a position at the moment to really capitalise on it and share in the benefits and the proceeds of that. There's been a motion to release pension funds somewhat in their restrictions on what they can invest in, so that they can deploy a bit more to private and small young tech companies, which is brilliant because we can't really support the wider economy other than just through jobs creation and things like that if the capital that goes in doesn't necessarily come back in one cycle. So I think it's great that we are starting to complete this loop. I think that's really important as well. What are investors looking for? I think particularly from an academic spin-out route, the most important thing that we'll look at first is the team. And all too often we will see spin-out companies with a part-time team of an academic that's gone and developed some technology, but it's only a part-time effort. They might have other research obligations and interests. They might have other company interests. But at the point that an investor invests, the IRR clock starts ticking. And so we've made a commitment to you, a technology company, with our investment. We expect the same commitment in return, which is a full-time dedication to the cause and a commitment to pursue growth. I think the other thing that in this sort of field that we're cognizant of is having a clean and scalable approach to equity ownership and remuneration with regards to things like IP. I think we see the equity ownership as really just there for the people who are part of the go-forward business. That might be the academic coming across and doing it full-time, and so the equity is rightfully with the academic. But Hamish and I were actually talking about this beforehand. There's a big difference between UK universities, which will often take 20-30% potentially of a spin-out, versus in the US, where it can be much lower. It can be in around 6%. And it depends on the type of business that you're looking at and is it IP rich or not. But we like to see a cleaner approach with a 40% ownership by a university on a cap table. That's somewhat prevents the company from growing and securing further investment because the university is unlikely to be a party that will support the business going forward.
So how does the university derive value from the idea that it might have generated in basic research and then a bit of applied research, and then you've got this muddy development area and then the commercialization bit somehow or other? So
I think the remuneration has to be appropriate to the role it plays. So licensing and royalties is a great way to attribute value back to the university and the efforts that went into developing the tech. Royalty holidays are great because it stops you taking money out of the business too early and it really allows them to get on and grow and then probably actually pay back more over the lifetime of the royalty if it's deferred a little bit. Whereas having parties on cap tables of companies which don't really have any role in the future of the business isn't really in the business's best interest and won't help them go on and achieve.
Hamish, you look like you had something that you wanted to say about that.
As you said, we were debating this before. I think it's a really interesting area, and I think it's one which is quite complex. So I think just looking at headline equity stakes, you need to dig a bit deeper and see what the arrangement is. Is that dilutable, non-dilutable? What is the university actually doing for that? Which is a very good point. How much is it putting in? I think consensus is there is no single right answer to that approach. There's no one-size-fits-all approach. It has been the message repeatedly from when people have looked into this. I'm sure there is more that can be done around standardisation, around good practice sharing, around convening groups to come up with a sensible arrangement. But I think I would slightly disagree that only the founders should have equity. If retaining a stake is the best way for that university to realise some benefit for what is ultimately normally a public investment in the research, then I don't think it's unreasonable, but not if it impedes growth. We would always say it's far better to have a small percent of something than 100% or 40% of nothing. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. And just before we come to how, Chris, you've worked in a couple of fintech startups. So what's your experience of the startup world? How difficult is it to get funding? And
I think it's a difficult question because things have somewhat changed over the last 6 to 9 months. I think experience of the startup world it's a fantastic opportunity to go and learn something about something which you knew nothing about. Sam Bankman-Fried has been called out a lot recently with all these quotes saying that I knew nothing about blockchain before I got started. And there are very few founders that I've spoken to that are real experts in a field before they've found a problem and decided to go out and solve it. So I think his comments being taken somewhat out of context. It's a really exciting opportunity to go and get stuck in and gain some accountability, and then actually sharing the enjoyment of achieving something. It's a sense of achievement that I've not really experienced elsewhere. Often finding myself as a small cog in a very large machine, where it doesn't really matter how hard you work or achieve, it doesn't really make a difference.
thank you. How, I'm going to ask you whether you concur with that. How you're currently in a startup journey with your company, RoboK. So can you tell us the background to how you got started?
Yeah, sure. I think just also what you're mentioning about, know very little about the industry you're solving the problems for. So we are solving problems for, companies like port operators. And I think I know very little about a port operator. But once I started to make more visits and doing more installation and connect to the cameras and our solutions, you start to appreciate a lot more about where everything around you comes from. It's a very big part of the logistics. And what we're actually applying is using a artificial intelligence-based computer vision software as well as data science approach, trying to understand what the camera sees and extracting information about people movement, assets movement, then actually trying to do more analytics on looking at dwelling anomalies and interaction as well. And the use cases we work in is looking at safety and efficiency, how safe individuals are when they're interacting with this very heavy-duty and large-scale machineries and in a very large site. Sort of the ports we work with have hundreds of acres of land, and it's really when you start to make all those visits and you start to think about and synthesize what sort of solutions the technology could be applied to. And I kind of get into the habit of whenever I become within like a train station or in a a theater like this, I start looking at what cameras are around and start thinking about if we had this, then we can make it more productive. We can probably extract more insights. But how we got started, I think we were very lucky that we started as me and actually a team of friends from university, and I came from an economics and statistics background, and I worked in professional services and project management, and most recently at ARM, a fabulous semiconductor company that kind of produces the IP for 95% or more of all the smartphones. And so we had an idea, which was how do we turn what a drone, sort of a first-person view, and how do you turn that into a third-person view where you not only see what the drone sees, but also the environment where the drone is within the space, within the 3D space. So very much like how do you control a system or a drone in a very game-like view, click to go from A to B. So with that idea, we won the prize from King's College Entrepreneurship Prize, which is where I was at King's College in Cambridge. And we were very lucky. We were awarded £20,000, no equity, from a very generous donor who funded the prize and kind of got us started. And then we were looking at, then we got in touch with Cambridge Enterprise, which is the official commercialization arm of University of Cambridge, where it has two basically two functions within it. There's a technology transfer where they work with academic professors, etc., to license the technology and think about commercialization plans. The other part is a seed fund. So we start engaging with the seed fund and thinking about where is the best use cases for our technology, which is very low power and embedded computer vision software that could run on low power embedded systems. And there could be many use cases you could actually go into. So we went through a process of kissing 1,000 frogs. That's like a term I like to use quite a lot, and I've learned from my chairman as well. I actually met my chairman through the university's network as well, who was a very successful serial entrepreneur in the space of industrial IoT, which is actually very relevant to the sort of the sectors we're working in. So I think combining with passion from a relatively young teen, but with a lot of technical knowledge, with industry know-how, and who've done it, seen from zero to an exit, that's a really good combination. I think that would really be quite helpful to have a balanced team. Trying to think about how to commercialize technology and scale.
So the Cambridge University's enterprise were able to be the incubator to help you get up and running and facilitate contacts in terms of funding and experienced mentors.
Yeah, in a sense. Although they don't have an actual physical, actually a program for that, but that's what they're doing sort of intrinsically, looking at who they've known in the network. Maybe there was somebody else, another portfolio company who's, maybe has synergies with what you're building, or there might be somebody who may be a mentor in their network that you should speak with, trying to understand, who has the industry knowledge. I think that's really key for a team that's more technology focused, and it's really helpful to trying to get a head start in terms of how do you approach a vertical, especially we do B2B sales. That's really important. How do you approach? And for me, I think we kind of are trying to go from mostly founder-led sales and to a bit more, how do you be more repeatable, scalable sales as well. So I think that stage, having, getting access to, knowledge and experiences is really, really helpful. And sometimes just talking with clients, it's not a bad idea bringing somebody who has 20 years of industry experience, trying to help you with the credibility as well. So
yeah, and so that's what universities can really bring to a startup,
Illuminize.
Isn't it? In some ways, a university can be a bit of a brake on a startup, and it can slow things down, but it can bring a ton of credibility and deep resources to help startups to really run. And give you an advantage, yeah.
Especially when you're smaller and you haven't got too much track record yet. So that's maybe the first thing you talk to a possible client. You said where the technology is from, what the team does, and sometimes that's also important for them to, basically have a vote of confidence in you, to take the leap of, doing a trial with you, doing use your early prototype as well.
And at what point did you start to believe that this startup idea that you'd got £20,000 for had legs and you really could go for it?
Yeah, I think definitely at that time it was a lot of money, but when you actually start running, it's not enough. But of course, it's then talking to potential clients where they see where it could be used as well. And I think we're still at the stage of really trying to validate our product market fit. So what I think is really seeing the potential to scale is when we speak to different clients in the same vertical, sort of the time to close a deal and the time it takes to move from sort of move them within the sales funnel, that becomes
Mm.
much shorter, and then you start to move a lot faster as well. So that's kind of where we see is that's scale, and that's kind of where we are, is we're ready to do more commercialization and prove that we can scale from 2 cameras at a customer site to 10 to 50, and then we can do it with 4 other customers, and then maybe 1 in another vertical. That's kind of your way of getting to Series A and beyond.
Yeah, brilliant. Well done, you. Yeah. I'm quite impressed with how you've done this. And now, really, you're away from the university. You've escaped. You're now adding
10 minutes away, but yeah.
Yes. But you don't need their help anymore. You're up and running, aren't you? You're after some Series A funding.
They're on my board, so
Already, so you've still got a link back to the university.
because they're actually our lead investor in our seed round. So I have a board director. And they're there to really come from more of a investor perspective, trying to help you with the growth of the company. I also have other sort of lead investor who co-led the round, but it's I think because they also are really good in terms of introducing and some new introductions, and sometimes they may have people visiting them, maybe from other VCs, etc. So I still see the impact and effects being positive, and there's still maybe new intros and also with marketing as well. So just I think Monday we had a press release about a project we were part of working with some critical national infrastructure that is the largest port operator in the UK. They own 21 ports here, and also Kier Highway, who's the largest contractor to UK highways. And they help us share on their public channels, which is always quite helpful as well. So you never know kind of where the conversation lead to as well.
Brilliant. I mean, Hamish, would you say that is a strong example of how universities can really support commercial knowledge exchange?
It's an absolutely brilliant example. I think there's a couple of things, though, which are interesting to kind of pull out of that story. It's fantastic to hear the support that Cambridge Enterprise gave to that. I can relate to the kissing the frogs thing. My favourite quote from Tony Raven was, he was the ex-chief executive of Cambridge Enterprise. Yeah. He described his job as telling people their babies were ugly, which I think is quite apt. Your idea isn't quite as good as you think it is. I think there's quite a lot to unpick there. One thing I would say, going back to your Steve West quote, universities will contribute 22,000 or so businesses and startups. The vast majority of those will be student startups. So if you look at the figures where that number's derived from, in terms of spin-outs, and by spin-outs we mean IP owned by the university, which is transferred into a formal spin-out company that's spun out of the university, as opposed to a startup where there's no university IP vested in it. Spin-outs, there's about 160 a year in the UK companies. Student startups, over 4,000 a year. So in terms of how universities support commercialisation, they're really missing a trick if they don't take student startups seriously. The other thing I think to reflect on is you had obviously a good experience in that you described how you leveraged Cambridge Enterprise's funding, networks, you still have an ongoing relationship with them. That's brilliant, but I'm not sure it's replicated. That experience would be replicated throughout every university in the UK. And I think there's a real opportunity there for universities to think how they provide that support. Often there's quite a lot of student enterprise support in universities. Sometimes it's not as well joined up to the research commercialisation, the technology transfer office, if you like, which again I think is a real, people could be missing a trick if they're not joining those things up effectively. And because you need all the same things that a spin-out would need. You need access to finance, you need networks, you need potentially ongoing support. The other thing I would say is not all universities are able to provide that, and not all places in the country have as good access to finance or as good networks to leverage. So I think there's a real kind of levelling up piece there of, how can universities, absolutely, they can be that kind of real stimulus for creating these companies, but if they don't have all the other pieces of the jigsaw, if they don't have easy access to venture capital or, high net worth individuals, angel networks, things like that, easy to come by in Cambridge, not so easy in other parts of the country, that can be a real barrier as well.
Yeah, but it's like positive, cycles as well, when they, become successful and then they give back, and then that with their time, not only the money, but time and mentorship, that's quite
And that's
critical.
what you see in these really effective regional innovation ecosystems that you find around Oxford and Cambridge. It's that kind of virtuous cycle of companies being supported to start up. They stay within the locality, they attract inward investment, they attract jobs, and that means more stuff can happen. And also talking about knowledge exchange and the power of the exchange part of that term is that you may in the future have a research relationship with the university again, or Cambridge alumni might be employed by your company, or you might offer placements to Cambridge students. And there's that really nice kind of virtuous relationship that builds up through that ecosystem around the university, which I think is really important. But yeah, great story, and great to hear it as well supported by Cambridge. So.
Yeah, and what was that stat you just said, Hamish, about the number of student companies compared to IP licenses?
If you look at the data, it's approximately 160 to 170 spin-outs per year from UK universities, and over 4,000 graduate startups. Many more graduates than that start their own companies, but what's counted in the official data is when they've had certain types of assistance from the university, like you have. You know, if you're engaged with Cambridge Enterprise, they've seed funded something, that would count as a graduate startup.
So really, universities focusing more on their graduate startups might be more impactful than relying perhaps on academic spin-outs.
Well, I think ultimately you need to do both. I think there's some brilliant IP being generated, and you can see some spectacularly successful spin-out companies from universities, particularly in the life sciences, in engineering, in computer science, and increasingly actually in other disciplines, so from social sciences, arts and humanities. There's huge potential there to do university spin-outs based on IP, or whether that's kind of hard IP or the know-how of social scientists or people engaged in the arts. So there is huge potential there, and there's potential to do more, but don't neglect not just student startups, but staff startups, which sometimes are called sneak-outs because you can't really see where the IP comes from. But yeah, you've got to support the whole range. You've got to do it in a joined-up way. So don't artificially separate your research-based technology transfer from your enterprise division, if you like.
Great, thank you. Now, I'm going to wrap up so we can take some audience questions in a minute. And I hope you've got some great questions because we've got such a good panel here. But my last question to you all is, if you were in government right now, and frankly you may well be called if the Tories stay in for much longer, what one thing would you champion to support the two-way flow of people and ideas between the research environment and the wider economy? Let's start with you, Chris.
I think I would be really trying to promote and support the things like Cambridge Enterprises. We have something similar in Oxford called Oxford Science Enterprises, and it's a fantastic way to engage a local community of generally high net worth, but these are people who have been often successful in their own careers. They have networks, they have companies, it's connections. It can really help accelerate a company's growth. And so I'd be really trying to do that to, not just in the South though. Hamish's point was right, we need to be doing this across the nation.
Yeah. And they're university affiliated organisations, but they're not part of the university, are they?
Oxford Science or OSE is...
They are part, so
yeah.
Official commercialisation arm, so
okay.
Basically aligned with, so they, for example, they will be the ones that deal with university-generated IPs, etc.
Okay, thank you for that, Chris. Hal, what would you do?
I think for our perspective, I think being a bit selfish and thinking about basically just encouraging, I think, industries, supply chain and logistics, where the industry might be more traditional, and just really encouraging also being openness to new technologies using AI. It's not to take jobs away, it's to help with the higher risk and more laborious and mundane jobs, so people can focus on making decisions based on actual data, so they can be more informed and assisted. So seeing them as tools when there's new technology being generated from research.
Thank you, Hal. Yeah. And what would you do, Hamish?
So I definitely agree with everything both of you have said. I think my kind of pitch, if I was Prime Minister or the Science Minister, would be to join up the parts better. So more continuity between the fundamental research, the ideas, the translational funding, how that translates into identification of high potential ideas, seed funding, continued investment, not just in terms of money, but in terms of talent into them. And then how can you provide the right environment for those brilliant companies to really grow and scale and do that in the UK? So going back to your earlier point, unlocking the ability of pension funds to invest, thinking about how public procurement can be brought to bear, because you look at the amount of public procurement and how much UK government spends on that. Now, a lot of it's on really quite dull things which are nothing to do with R&D, but I think America, one of the one of the things they do there more effectively is leverage their public procurement to be able to scale their startup and growing companies more effectively. So join up all the bits in the system, make sure there's consistent support throughout everywhere in the UK, not just in London, South East, Golden Triangle, and allow companies not just to start up successfully here, but to scale here without going elsewhere, and attract new companies, maybe who are incorporated abroad, to come here, have a presence here and scale here as well, with all the kind of prosperity benefits that brings to the UK.
Great. I was going to sum up, but I think you've just done that for me, so thank you very much, Hamish. Does anyone have any questions they would like to ask? I think we've got people with microphones. There's at the back there. Sarah, do you have a microphone? Yeah.
Hello. Can you hear me? It's a question for
Is it on? I don't think the microphone's on. Yeah.
Hi, it's a question for Hamish. Love the stats on student startups and spin-outs. Going back to your sort of definition of what's investable, what can move forward, is it quality versus quantity? How much of those 4,000 students sort of startups actually progress forward that you're aware of, as opposed to the academic ones? Do the academic ones go through more rigorous sort of upfront, because it's more government money going into them? What's been your experience of that?
So I think spin-outs, most universities will have quite an in-depth process. So they're probably subject to more scrutiny and take longer to get to kind of point of incorporation than graduate startups. But they're probably quite different in nature as well. So there could be a lot more kind of hard IP, deep tech kind of spin-outs as opposed to student startups. I don't have the stats on the kind of 3-year survival rate of graduate startups, student startups. I suspect it is lower than formal spin-outs, which have quite a high survival rate, higher than the kind of general population of new companies in the UK. But I think there's many reasons for that, and they're very different in nature. The people who are founding them have very different characteristics, etc. So I think it's really kind of hard to, even if I did have the statistic for the 3-year survival rate of graduate startups, I'm not sure it'd be fair to compare it to spin-outs and draw any conclusions about the quality of the ideas coming through. On the whole, I would agree with the principle of providing you meet a quality bar, do as many as possible. It's extremely hard to predict from the outset, I think, whether a company will be successful or not. I don't know if Howard would agree, but when you're just starting off, it's incredibly hard to.
I think it's also sort of the 3-year thing. A lot of them, it's probably also linked to like EIS and kind of those things. So 3 years is a hurdle. But I also think it also depends on, is that like a spectacular death in a sense of it was fast growing, all the things, or it was kind of more bootstrapping, all these other things as well. So it's I think it depends on how the company was operating. Are they hiring aggressively?
And I guess the other point is that failure is not necessarily a bad thing. And I think, maybe, I think one of the things the UK is criticised for is having a different attitude to risk compared to the US, for example. So it would be much more interesting for me to see, well, what does that student then go on to do? Do they become a serial entrepreneur and maybe second time, third time, fourth time around, they hit the jackpot?
Yes.
Have you given people the skills and the mindset?
Sometimes it can be a bit challenging being a first-time founder as well. You haven't failed, but you haven't succeeded. But I think sometimes if it's serial entrepreneur who's done, so they already maybe made a fair share of mistakes, and there's a lot of learning as well, because a lot of this is validation. Like even for us, like just very quick iteration and validate that idea didn't work. Let's scrap that. It's all about trying to limit the resources you spend on an idea that won't scale.
Yeah.
A lot of that. So I think,
and being smart enough to know that.
Yeah,
actually.
maybe for investors' perspective as well, when you see maybe people who have repeatedly have done something, although maybe they get closer and closer to that they've seen this is the idea to go for as well. Maybe it's actually quite positive.
Yeah, I agree.
As well.
There was another question down here.
Thank you so much. I was wondering, we talked in the beginning about metrics and so on. Do you also take a look at ESG metrics or environmental, social governance, or is it mainly monetary? Should we do that? And knowing from my own research, that usually requires longer time frames also in investing. Do you take care of that? Because we also want to, all of us bring a society that takes care of these issues and of societal challenges.
I think it's one of the big, when I said, when we were developing the KEF, actually probably the most valuable thing for me that it told us is what we don't know. So in a lot of the stats, and again, going back to Steve West's stat of £9.5 billion worth of support for businesses from universities, that's based on the income universities receive from those businesses. So they're using income as a proxy for impact on a kind of economic principle that if someone's willing to pay for something, it must be of some worth for them, which is fine, but I'd be far more interested to get further down that kind of value chain to what's the real impact they're having. But we don't know at the moment. The official statistics, which are gathered by, there's a statutory return that all universities in the UK have to give, it just gives the number of spin-outs. If you had the company registration numbers, you could go and look at how they're structured, how they're growing. You could dig in and link data much more effectively. You could look at what areas they're operating in, whether they have any particular relationship to SDGs, what their patent portfolio looks like. There's a whole myriad of really rich information you can get with linking data. It's very hard to do at the moment. There's companies like Bowhurst that provide more kind of in-depth curated databases that do that, but at a kind of a consistent UK level, it's quite hard to do at the moment, although it's definitely, I know my ex-colleagues at UKRI are looking into that kind of thing, and it's definitely the sort of direction of travel it's going in. So.
Yeah, because I think the measures there could really help to set forward where you want to go.
Yeah.
So the performativity of the measures could help you.
Yeah.
You discussed that.
Yeah, so I talked about the amount of investment in a company. It's not a bad proxy for is this a good idea or not that's come out of university. Still doesn't tell you anything about ultimately the economic or the social value that company has, for sure. I agree.
And you're investing, if I may ask?
Sure. So I think on the investing side, there's very little agreement around what we should be capturing and measuring, but there's certainly agreement that we should be doing something. So there's lots of initiatives which are in place at the moment to try and actually let's have a discussion about what should we be capturing. There are more and more investors who are solely focused on ESG fronts, and so they are impact investors, and so they will only select companies which can have a directly measurable benefit to the planet or to social measures or something like that. But then again, you've got more generous investors who are not ESG first, but they are very much cognizant of ESG. And so ESG is becoming a more standardized part of term sheets. Now, it might not say you absolutely have to track this because that might work for one company and not another. So it's becoming more standardized to say, well, as a result of this term sheet and this investment, you need to be developing these policies as they work for you. You need to work with us to discuss it. And you need to come up with, say, a number of metrics which are important to you to track to go forward. So it's absolutely becoming part of the narrative of investment, but it's just not quite standardized.
Thank you for that question. I think I might bring it to a close unless there's any other burning questions to be asked.
Just one. Hello, my question is to how there is when you had the idea for your business, there is always a moment of doubt about I have this idea and I don't know if it will work, how will it work? So, and is there a moment where you sort of cross the line over to like thinking, yes, I'm going ahead with this? And what was the role that the incubation with Cambridge University helped, contributed to you achieving that confidence or the realization that, yes, I should go ahead with this? Could you share something about that experience?
Yeah, sure. Thanks a lot for the question. I think one thing about whether you believe in an idea is all about gathering traction, and that's how you show to the world of why is it what you're doing important as well. So of course, it's going back to kind of the first principle is, are you solving a valuable problem? What is the benefit you are you're delivering to your potential users? You know, are you helping them be more productive? Can this be measured by, you know, how much more percentage increase in productivity or cost saving? So like how much they are currently spending on this, but with your technology now it's reduced to, you know, 10%. What we found, for example, is the number of safety-related incidents we had with one warehouse owner that, having used our solution for 3 months, their number of incidents dropped by 90%. So a lot of these things, it's I think a lot about it's talking to your prospective users and customers, to surveys and, you know, learn more and test your ideas, validate your ideas. So I think in terms of Cambridge Enterprise, I think maybe more on the facilitation side of things, maybe initially when you don't already have a network in this vertical. So having them, maybe they know somebody who could be a friendly person for you to talk to. You're not selling to this person, but that could be where probably the benefit is mostly in, that they may know somebody who might know somebody in this vertical for you to just talk to. And then the first starting sentence is, I'm not trying to sell, I'm just trying to learn. And then that's kind of where you start saying, oh, I've got this idea, and how big is this problem for you? And what are you currently doing to solve this problem? Things like that. Are you doing anything? Sometimes if they're not doing anything to solve this problem, it's not necessarily good. It could be just not worthwhile solving. Yeah.
Thank you. That was a great question to end on. So for me, I found this a really interesting conversation. So thank you, all three of you, for making the time for us this afternoon. And I guess the message is we need to be more joined up across the piece, from the commercial sector through academia, and just keep swirling stuff around. Release investment, somehow release more UK investment so that they see the final loop. And I guess we just have to keep on making connections inside and outside of universities, don't we? And just keep pushing to have that ecosystem going round and round. So thank you very much for your time.